I don't think the government knows what the consequences of this legislation are, let alone the rest of us. The parliamentary committee looking into these matters was given about a week. Despite that limited time frame, they apparently received over 7,000 submissions. They didn't get time to publish more than 200 of those 7,000 submissions. You can imagine they didn't spend much time reading them either.
Bill, the hate speech laws, I do want to just explain to people what provisions we know were in that legislation.
Yeah, so key among the provisions is the ability to ban groups when they engage or advocate hate crimes based on race, nationality or ethnic origin. That'll be done with ASIO and the Attorney General working together without the requirement that the government follow procedural fairness in that process.
What does that mean?
Yeah, meaning no convictions in a court.
Right.
You can't appeal on the basis that they've been arbitrary, that they've rushed it, that they haven't read their materials.
So basically, once you're labelled with this or, become part of this kind of legislation or subject to it, there's no avenue for you to really appeal it based on its unfairness.
Very limited, I would imagine.
Okay.
The Parliament can disallow it, but that would mean that the government would have to change its mind if they were the people who did the hate group designation, because they, more often than not, control the House.
Yeah.
But that's one of the key problems with this legislation is that the government is saying, okay, this is going to apply to Nazi groups and radical Islamic terrorist groups. But the legislation is so broad, and because it's been rushed through, we haven't actually even investigated the unintended consequences. But what was immediately obvious to lawyers, civil libertarians, people perhaps on different sides of the ideological spectrum, like the IPA and even the Nationals, who split from the coalition on voting for this, is that you just need a state police to say, look, we think this group is a problem. Then you just need ASIO, the Director General, to predict future potential behaviour and say, yeah, look, maybe down the track this group could potentially turn violent. That is all a minister needs to say, okay, this is going to be a hate group.
Yeah.
And then once that is made, there is no recourse. And anyone who supports that group in any form, so donations, slogans, paraphernalia, joining, recruiting, processing amongst them, can also be charged under these laws. And we've seen what has happened with the UK, which has similar laws when it's come to people protesting Palestinian causes or against genocide. Palestine Action was determined to be a hate group by the UK government, and people who have been out protesting with Palestine Action, have been arrested just for sitting there holding a sign saying, I support Palestine Action.
Yeah.
The Attorney General, Michelle Rowland, appeared on 7:30 on the night that the laws passed. She was unable to say whether supporting an anti-genocide protest could potentially lead to a hate group designation and then also being charged. Was unable to give those answers. Unable to say whether under these new laws criticising the nation state of Israel for its policies could potentially land you in the territory where you would be looked at under this hate group laws. So
and being subject to these hate legislation, it's now criminal. That's the outcome of this legislation. So you can go to jail for being part of these kinds of organisations or for engaging in what is deemed to be, I guess, hate speech. Amy, you've talked about how that's been applied in the United Kingdom, seeing thousands of arrests and things like that. And it's quite a criminal standard normally does not apply, for breaches of the Racial Discrimination Act, for example. Normally those have been dealt with as, civil penalties. Bill, I'm really conscious that these laws, we've already talked about how there wasn't much time for them to be inquired into, and we did see some changes yesterday as they made their way through the Parliament. I mean, how much scrutiny has actually been applied to this, as Amy said? How much do we know about the unintended consequences?
Well, I think, as Amy pointed out, I don't think the government knows what the consequences of this legislation are, let alone the rest of us. The parliamentary committee looking into these matters was given about a week to hand down its report, including 2 days of hearings and 2 days for people to make submissions. Despite that limited time frame, they apparently received over 7,000 submissions. But to give you a sense of how rushed they were, they didn't get time to publish more than 200 of those 7,000 submissions. You can imagine they didn't spend much time reading them either. And the committee's report is a political document. It anticipates the negotiations that were going on behind the scenes with the government and the Greens and the coalition. It's also worth mentioning that committee, which will be responsible for reviewing these laws in the future, is limited to major party membership only. The crossbenchers who are asked to pass the laws weren't allowed to participate in the review of those laws, nor will they participate in the review in 2 years' time either. So we're talking about a very limited level of scrutiny, only on the original bill, not the changes, from a committee that didn't have the chance to figure out what might come of this.
And I know that, for example, David Pocock was explaining today that, he only got this legislation yesterday, and then with all the changes, he just felt he simply could not vote for it because he really didn't know what was in it. The coalition itself originally was going to oppose it, Amy, and then backflipped, and the Nationals opposed this, but the Liberals passed it after doing a secret deal with the government. I mean, the politics surrounding this as well, just take me through the coalition, I guess.
Yeah, the coalition is really interesting on this because it really highlights that the internal fractures that followed the coalition into the summer have not gone away. There was a moment of unity with the coalition in the wake of Bondi around, the politicisation of what happened in Bondi, and that helped extend Susan Lee's leadership because many people predicted that she would not last the summer, and indeed her colleagues were openly speaking to any journalist that they passed about not expecting Susan Lee to last the summer. She did, largely because Bondi gave them something to unite around. And then there was the moment where the coalition was calling for Parliament to be recalled, calling for the hate speech laws, calling for stronger vilification protections, but only for certain elements of the community. In this case, it was Jewish Australians, which obviously have been victims of increased hate and anti-Semitism. But constitutionally, you can't just single out one group of people as deserving more protection than others. And the coalition did not want to extend protections to the LGBTIQ community, for example. So we started seeing early splits in the unity with the coalition. Then when the hate speech bill came out, the coalition was vehemently opposed to it. They were saying, no, this vilification goes too far, mostly because it would mean that people who were receiving hate in other communities outside of Jewish Australians would also, have access to these laws. And that upset people on the conservative side of politics who thought that that was going too far. And so they split, and then the vilification sections were removed, and Susan Lee then entered into secret negotiations with Anthony Albanese. It was one-on-one, leader to leader, to get the bill basically re-energised. She made agreements through negotiation, including that the government would have to speak to the opposition leader before they made this designation, which she was waving around as a win yesterday. It's not consult, it's just tell them we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And as a couple of people in Labor pointed out, that could be Pauline Hanson or Barnaby Joyce, the way that the polling is going, but that's a side matter. The Nationals, though, were not happy because Matt Canavan, in particular, who is undergoing pre-selection in Queensland as we speak, was hearing a lot from constituents that this bill was going to have a lot of unintended consequences. And they don't mean for people who are standing against genocide. They mean people who perhaps are arguing against trans rights or arguing against, other conservative ideologies, that they could be caught up in this bill. So they split. They didn't vote for it in the House. They abstained. And then in the Senate, as they did the late night bill, Bridget McKenzie led the revolt, basically saying we cannot support these. She blamed the government for not giving them a cohesive piece of legislation that could receive bipartisan support. But that was ignoring the fact that the Liberals were well on board for this. And they didn't abstain. They voted against it. David Littleproud came into the chamber at one point and sat behind them. They didn't cause too much of a ruckus. But the consequences of this, while they're trying to play them down, Bridget McKenzie is a member of the Shadow Cabinet. The Shadow Cabinet had agreed to pass these laws. She's broken the Shadow Cabinet solidarity.
So traditionally, she would be required to resign.
You would think. It's one of the reasons Andrew Hastie stepped back from Susan Lee's cabinet. She's just sort of saying, this is my position, but hasn't indicated that she would resign. David Littleproud now knows that he has those internal fractures within his party and that they did not leave with Barnaby Joyce. Another member of the LNP, Cole Boyce, who's the member for Flynn, is openly talking about joining One Nation. And we're starting to see the coalition fracture internally again, while also showing that David Littleproud and Susan Lee do not have authority over their party room. And that is going to have further ramifications for them beyond these laws.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.